Bliss and Grit is an entirely listener-supported show. Supporting us is also designed to support you through keeping the episodes rolling, but also through rewards for your donation, like a getting started guide, a private forum, and downloadable meditations. To become a supporting member, you can visit patreon.com/bliss and grit.
Hello, beautifuls. You are listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Vanessa Scotto, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and my co-host, Brooke Thomas. On the show, we're having conversations about the awakening spiritual path. What does that even mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything? The beauty and the crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life. If you've listened to the podcast in the past, you know how much we value the practice of meeting ourselves with tenderness and love. In this episode, we're going into much greater detail about what it tangibly looks and feels like to heal through self-love. Our conversation covers everything from neuroscience to personal experiences to practical exercises where we can learn how to bring love to the parts of ourselves that need it the most. As we shift to meeting ourselves with a genuine experience of loving kindness, we can rewire and release the conditioning that's been creating so much suffering in our lives and step into a new, brighter experience. If you're enjoying the show, there are a few ways you can help support us. We'd love it if you would leave us a review on iTunes. What this does is it helps more people find the show, and it just feels great for us to hear from you. You can also head over to blissandgrit.com to subscribe to our weekly digest or to find out more about becoming one of our supporting Patreon members. Since we've chosen not to have advertisers on the show right now, becoming a patron is the one way to help us provide these episodes that we hope uplift your world. If you've been benefiting from the show, we'd super appreciate you popping over to Patreon and making a donation. Brooke and I also see clients privately, so feel free to go to the website for more information on that. Okay, everyone, here we go. Hello, Brooke.
Hey, Vanessa.
So today we're going to talk about something that you and I talk about quite a bit, but I think it'll be really fun to have a whole conversation dedicated to this topic because it's so important and there's so much to understand about it. And it's really been so foreground for me. So what we're going to talk about today is the power and practice of meeting yourself with love. And for any of you who've been listening for a while, you may know Brooke and I have been on quite a journey. I mean, in particular, the last couple of months, but really all of our lives.
I was going to laugh at you. Every time we say it, we say a different time period, in particular the last 3 years, in particular the last couple of months. I think it's just ongoing.
Well, in particular, the last 3 months or so, because we've been doing this DNRS and we've been really trying to look closely at how does transformation happen? And I've picked up the word transformation lately, I noticed, over healing, because sometimes that word healing, I don't know, it's almost gotten a rap of like, I will forever be in this healing process. And why I'm using the word transformation is, I mean, really to release and move through and hopefully move past something. Mm-hmm. So we've been looking at the kind of, really like the process of transformation. Like, how does it happen? What is grace? How can we co-create so specifically? And I think it's fair for me to speak for you here, Brooke. And what we've found so far in getting really up close and personal about this for ourselves is that the most effective and liberating thing we have in the toolkit is being able to meet ourselves and our pain and our wounding and our conditioning with love. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Discovering that was the beginning of the complete shift for me.
Yeah. What was interesting is, I think all of the teachers we've had on the show have probably pointed us to that in their own language, right? I mean, I'm sure John Prendergast did, since he's always talking about the heart, and, I'm sure Jeannie is love. She's got so much love bubbling through her. But I think when we first met Matt Kahn, that was the first thing that was really coming through. Like his book, Whatever Arises, Love That, was the first time I really got that clear sense of, oh yeah, meet this with love. And it was when I started I had a spontaneous meditation once. I was listening to, I think it was his Sounds True podcast with Tammy Simon. And he was talking about meeting things with love. And I had this spontaneous movement to lay down and meditate. And I saw this vision where I saw myself ill, and I had been dealing with health issues at the time. And I saw myself in this really, really ill state. And spontaneously, I just wrapped the one that was ill in my arms and held her with such tenderness and love. And that was a really potent moment for me because, up until then, I think it's hard to describe the depths of what it means to accept oneself and love oneself. It's almost like I think we have an idea of it, and then we reach that marker, and then we're like, well, that's not quite enough. And then we go to the next level, and we go to the next level. So I had learned to tolerate it. I had learned to make peace with it, but I hadn't quite moved to love it. And when I could love my body, even when it was sick, when I could love the part of my brain that still was coded to be the ill one, it was magical. It was alchemical. Not only did something shift inside, but it was evocative. I was moved to tears by the beauty of the whole experience, right? So we got that when we first started studying with Matt Kahn, which you and I have done a lot of over the last year or so. But I think for both of us, when we started doing DNRS and we started to look at, okay, how can I'm sorry, in case you're just listening, that's dynamic neural retraining systems. And it's a methodology to retrain your neurobiology. And when we first started looking at that, we're looking at, do we not look at the painful things? Do we push them aside? Do we fuel positive emotions? And all of these things we've worked with, and they've been useful. But in the end, with all of this, I keep coming back to, and you meet it with love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the brief moments in our conversation with Neelam that stays with me all the time is just her little bit where she said tenderness and transcendence are one and the same. I don't know if she had also written that in her book, but it struck me when she said it to us. And that every once in a while you get a teaching from a teacher or a handful of times, and it just stays. Like it stayed in my system, and it keeps deepening, and it keeps delivering its gifts. It's a lived inquiry and experience as that continues to flower in me. It's so simple. It just sums it all up. To transcend something, right? Anything. We can say our conditioned selves, our habits of suffering, our beliefs about what we are, our beliefs about what the world is, all of those things. The ingredient, it's very simple, is tenderness. But it's so foreign for most of us, certainly in a dualistic culture. That's not what we do. Dualistic culture is identify the problem or the enemy or the bad guy or the thing that needs to be eradicated and go get it. Get rid of it. Slay the bad guy. That's what we're all marinating in as we grow up. So to come to this experience of being on this path and to have to find something else, we have to be able to move past am I doing it right or wrong? Am I getting there or not, or whatever the things are? And tenderness is the key ingredient. And for the sake of the episode, because we get a chance, this feels a little bit like being on a playground, because this is something that's been such a deep practice for us. And as you said, we've spoken to so many teachers about it. Everyone's pointing to this truth. But we get to really play now and zoom in and slow motion a little bit, slow motion the tape. What's it look like to do that? Because it's so vague. If we don't grow up in a culture where we do that, it's like, so I'll think of some of the examples of as I was trying to figure out what that meant for me, right? Not just as I've encountered and had the opportunity to sit with and learn from these teachers that point to it, but of course in the past too, before that. And, I think some initial instincts are probably like la 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 la, right? Like no, I love you, you're so great. No, I love you. When you catch yourself having a thought that's negative, but it's this way of like, shh, no, right? So what's caked in all of that is fear, shame that you're not able to get it right and love yourself enough. And yet that's, I think, the initial instinct. And then if I slow down and zoom in, well, there's a lot of different components. It's hard to know where to start when we do the slow motion video of loving the self. First, we can point to the obvious thing that we haven't pointed to. You have to first be able to become aware of the thoughts that are being fueled by the separate self. So first I have to notice if I'm being aggressive towards myself. For most of my life, I didn't. It was just life. It was just me, was constantly below the level of conscious awareness, flagellating myself or telling myself I will finally be good or worthy or deserve to exist once I fill in the blank.
Right. And not just being aggressive to yourself, but even notice if you're in need of love and support. Mm-hmm. Just hungry for it, starving for it, hurting and pain.
Yeah, right. That if there's a belief that you should be able to accomplish the task over there of finally being worthy of love or support or anything or nourishment, then you're not going to be able in the moment to go, this feels terrible. I can't do this anymore. Because it's the treadmill quality to it, right? I'll just keep chasing after the carrot on the stick.
Yeah, you're essentially talking about awareness. Like our guest Lynn last week in her book, when she was talking about what is awakening, as she was talking about awakened relating, and in a way we could say this is awakened relating with oneself, she was saying that the first most basic element of awakening is having awareness that you're not your thoughts, you're not your feelings, and having awareness that they're there. I'm having thoughts, I'm having feelings, I'm having a storyline. And also there's an awareness of that, right? So what you're describing is kind of the first step towards awakening in general, but certainly towards relating to yourself with love, because you can't have a relationship with yourself with love if you can't see that you are the awareness holding all of those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. And that that is not true, that you'll finally, be worthy of love once you, whatever the idea is. So there's a distance that's created first and foremost. This is why, since forever, people point to things like meditation and mindfulness practices, inquiry practices, trying to just increase the level of awareness. And I was talking with somebody recently, a client who was saying, I really know I know I should be meditating. How many of us have said that or heard people say that, whether it's friends, acquaintances, whatever? I know I should be meditating. And we have to get clear on why, for what? what do we want it for? Because if it's just because I should, or because good people meditate, or because it'll be good for me in some kind of vague way, I'll be more productive or more relaxed or things like that, it's not so helpful. But if we know, well, what I want is to be able to have more awareness about what are all the programs running in the background. What I want is an opportunity to slow down enough that I can shift the state of my nervous system. And we've done episodes on why meditate and what is meditation. So I'm not trying to sidetrack us, but just to say that then we can find what actually helps us to do that. Like in our Locke Kelly interview, he's very clear, like inquiry that's his thing. He's an inquiry guy, right? I tend to do really well with inquiry and somatic meditation and mindfulness practices. So it's just good to know what starts to give you more awareness, and it doesn't have to come all in one bundle, and it won't, where you're aware of everything all at once, but just starting to go like, oh, I do always tell myself whatever the thought is that's arising. And then it can be more workable.
I tend to visualize. I'm a very visual person. So when I think about meeting myself with love, I tend to have this visual that comes with it. And this is, I'm sorry, so binary. I hate to like create this, but this is the visual that comes with it. It's like there's a piece of me, like my higher self or something, stepping outside and turning back towards myself. You know, that's the image I get for the experience, although that's not exactly what it feels like when I'm doing it, but when I think about the whole process. And so it's almost like an image for that spaciousness you're describing. I am not the thoughts. I am not the feelings. I am not my conditioned self. I am not who I think I am. I am not a problem. All of these different things, this is what awareness gives you. And it's as if you can step outside of that storm of conditioning that's rolling around through the limbic mind. And you can step out and you can look back and say, I'm not all of that. So then what is it? And what's happening? And do I believe it? And how can I, have a new relationship to it? So I always get that image. And I think, I think it comes in simple moments. I know I've told this story before that was so simple, but it's weird how they stand out. When I was getting a divorce and I kept hearing my voice in my head telling me I was going to fall on the floor and die, and having this moment in my head where I'm like, wait a minute, I'm neither falling nor dying. What is this voice telling me? And that was like a moment when you see your awareness, like, I am not the voice that's saying fall on the floor and die. That voice is happening. And at the same time, I'm aware of it happening. So it can't be me, right? Like, this is what they mean by awareness when you do mindfulness practices. And have you had moments like that where it's just weird? I've had another one where I was in the shower. This is so stupid and simple. This is when I began meditating in my 20s, though. And I was like thinking to myself, this is so important. Yes, I've got to remember this, like some juicy thought that was going to change the world, kind of feeling so important. And then I was like, wait a minute, did I shampoo or condition yet? Like, I couldn't remember if I had done it because I was so into my thought. And by the time I went back to my thought, I couldn't remember what it was anymore. And I remember having this awareness, like, if that was so life-changing and important, how could I have forgotten it? And, it was starting to track the inner workings of the thought stream. And it was starting to recognize that I am not my thoughts, and my thoughts are kind of this thing that's happening, like the clouds passing in front of the sun.
Yeah. I've had a lot of visuals where I get these funny, looping, almost like you would watch a GIF, but they're not our awesome GIFs that we send each other all day long. Like these funny images. And if I remember back to ones that I had at different periods of my life where I would catch it because it was so frequent and be like, why do I keep seeing this image in my mind's eye? They were all sort of almost across the board victim narratives. Like, I would picture myself, the image would be this looping image of me walking on one crutch.
Oh.
Or like me trying to stay awake sitting somewhere and like I'm so tired that I'm falling asleep. So, my brain's communicating in visuals, but same. It's not saying like, honey, you're so broken down. It's actually just an identity that's calling attention to itself, keeping itself running out of habit, out of habit. Yeah.
Can we be super dorky? Okay. So actually meeting yourself with love needs very little words. It's really just turning towards oneself with a lot of tenderness and kindness. And we're going to talk about the how, but can we be dorks and like talk a little bit about the why and be scientific about it for all of those who are out there that are curious for a moment?
Dork out. Absolutely.
Yes. Let's dork out. Since we have been working with limbic rehabilitation, and in case you don't know, the limbic brain is one of the more primal parts of the brains, but all mammals have it. It's where we find safety, but also in relationship. It's safety and relationship. It's like, do I fit in? Do I belong? Am I worthy? And it basically is always scanning for signs of safety, in particular amongst people, but as well in your environment. But when like neuroscientists talk about it, they talk about the reptilian brain, which is like our real survival primal brain, the thing that makes us breathe even though we pass out. They talk about that as the reptilian. We talk about the limbic brain as the puppy. So it's the part that's in relationship. But I mean, this puppy gets us into a lot of chaos. Like, I think the puppy is a funny analogy because it makes the limbic brain seem so cute.
So fuzzy and velvety.
So fuzzy. But this part of our brain is essentially probably, as far as we can tell from neuroscience at this time, probably where we most find identity, because it's what codes like the basics that we need for survival, but it codes a lot of the narratives of who we are. And so, and a lot of people look at it as the kind of neurological seat of identity. And then we could argue that our muscles hold it and our cells hold it and our central nervous system holds it throughout. We could make all sorts of arguments about that. That would feel really valid as well. But just for the sake of this conversation, people would identify the limbic brain as sort of the seat of identity. And identity, as we know from these conversations, we're talking about separate self. We're talking about a locked structure of who you are that is defined by narratives. And this is always, always, always influenced by the past in some ways that are conscious to you and in many that are unconscious. Like you can carry intergenerational trauma here and mistake it for yourself. You could have been handed the most simple situation. I mean, many people relate stories that are so simple, like your mom told you, please eat this food and be a good girl. And that's it. Ta-da. The good girl identity was begun. And if that was reinforced enough, you can build a whole idea that you're only worthwhile if you're good. And that if you're naughty, devastation arises, right? And you hurt everybody. So anyway, this all happens in the limbic brain. Now, what we know about the limbic brain is it's not really bringing in rational thought. It's making decisions really quickly, and it's making assessments really quickly because it's more primal, it's more survivalistic than when we start to get to the neocortex and the frontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex, I'm sorry. So it's essentially making decisions really quick. Anything that survival has to happen like with a snap, and it happens under the radar. It happens unconsciously. So this is where we've talked about it a lot on the show. Our belief systems lie and they're sizing things up and they're creating meaning. And in the limbic brain, we always have who's the problem here? What's the problem here? Who's to blame? It's full of judgment. It's full of comparison. And it's also got a lot of questions of worth. Am I valuable? Am I worthy? Am I okay? Am I safe? These are a lot of the questions that the limbic brain asks. All right, cool. So when we think about meeting our pain or meeting our conditioning or our wounding, we can we can also just try it on for size to imagine that we're meeting this part of our being. It's like all of the narratives that were stored away into the limbic brain and then funneled also into the rest of our body. So to meet yourself with love, you have to shift out of the same consciousness. You can't meet the limbic brain from the limbic brain and give yourself the right cues of safety or the biggest, most open expression of love. So oftentimes when we're working with clients, since a lot of you also work with clients like Brooke and I do, if you're working with a problem and you can't get a sense of a higher consciousness, and I don't mean to like rank it like a hierarchy, but if you can't get above the problem, so to speak, and see it from a broader perspective, it's really easy to get lost in the minutia and the details and the problem itself. Is that all making sense?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to shift into another state. Brooke and I sometimes use the word dimension, right? Like we have to get into another dimension to have a higher vantage point so that we can bring in understanding, we could bring in wisdom and insight, and we can bring in actual big compassion, capital C compassion and capital L love. And this happens on a brain level as we can access the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex is where all of these emotions like love and compassion live. It's like the highest brain, they call it, because it's the most evolutionarily new. It's something that in some ways, I think I may be misquoting this part, is unique to humans, if I'm remembering my neuroscience. So for us to meet ourselves with love, it's like we're shifting out of the encoded portion of the brain that holds all of our past baggage and all of our cultural baggage and all of the pain and suffering and beliefs of our lineage. I mean, plus their strengths, but all separate self energy. And we're shifting into the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that is connected with the all. It's in the prefrontal cortex that we can get this highest sense of meaning, where we can start to be like, everything that's coming my way is for my higher good. I am a soul. I am consciousness. And I just want to read this one last sentence, and then I'm going to zip it for a while since I went on a big roll. But this is by a teacher, Alberto I can't say his name, Villoldo. Ta-da! From his book Illumination. We'll have it in the show notes on the website. He says, each time you consciously decide to replace your anger with compassion towards self and others, every time you replace your hurt and pride with the powerful force of humility, you lay down new pathways in your brain. You bring in the angels of the higher self. And that's just a little excerpt of what we're talking about, that when you can meet the emotion and the pain and the hurt from this place of love and compassion, this new place, you're essentially bringing in the angels of your higher self. And in that, we can start to rewire the way that we're experiencing reality and ourselves.
I think that's very helpful context and totally fascinating. I haven't been doing as much neuroscience reading as you have, so I'm just like enjoying I'm like, ooh.
Yes,
geeks fascinating.
For life.
Geeks for life. And, so maybe some ways, because this is something I've been playing with in myself, tons, like my own practice these days. And then also, of course, in client work as well. So like you're saying, if we are in a contracted state, if we're in the limbic brain, if we're in a limbic loop that we can't get out of, we can't just understand or browbeat our way out of it. We have to be able to shift into a different part of our brain. So how do we make the shift? Just want to say for the record, every teacher we've talked to has their own pointers for how to make this shift, but it is a very helpful context to know that everyone's talking about shifting into a place where you can contact things like safety, safe enough to be open, safe enough to be here, safe enough to enjoy, safe enough to receive.
Love.
We're like, hey, safe enough to receive. That's our jam. And so what are ways that we do that we start to make that shift? Or Judith Blackstone, when we spoke with her recently, she was talking about how she does not do the somatic unwinds, particularly in working with trauma, which is that's where it's held, until people really can have an experience of contacting fundamental consciousness. So we're all using different words and different pointers to the same place. And the descriptors of things to do, it's very easy if you're in a limbic part of your brain, or if you're in a more contracted state, let's say, to just skim over it and either give yourself the very skim abridged version, or to just think it seems dumb. And very commonly it seems overly simplistic, because the limbic brain, contracted states, they love complexity. Of course, it has to be a big problem, a hard problem. It's going to take a long time to solve it. These are all cues that we're in a certain place in our awareness, in our consciousness. So I'm going to say a few things that I've been playing with that are going to sound like, well, that's dumb. But when we slow it down, and when I have the real blessing of doing that with clients, where it's this intimate one-on-one meeting, we're both there because we're committed to this awareness, we're committed to this shift, you can really see like how things change. The first one that comes to mind is probably a little joke on me that it keeps pushing itself as the first one that wants to be said because it's the most boring. But we also just did a whole weekend with Matt Kahn where he was pointing to this one. It has been so delicious to sit around and listen to the sound of my own breath. That's exactly what meditation teaches all of us to do, right? It's like, oh yeah, you just sit down and notice your breath. But it's been like, oh my God, it feels so good. It's so wonderful to just attune to the breath. If we're in a very, very contracted space, the breath can feel scary. It can feel jagged and all over the place, and it can feel a little threatening to go towards the breath. So going towards the environment is one that I like very much. And honestly, in almost every moment, with a small percentage of moments being times where we are, as human beings, dealing with life-threatening harm or trauma, but most of the time we're not in the throes of that. We can be replaying it in innocence, right? Like that's how trauma imprints. So most of the time we can actually check out, really land in the moment we're living and look around. What's here that's nourishing? Where's the support here? So those are a couple of other ones that I really like. And we can notice really basic things, right? Like, okay, there's light and air. I happen to be in a room right now that's quiet. There's technology that allows me to talk to my beloved friend and also make a show out of it. There's food in my refrigerator. There's electricity in my house. We can find so many things. I have a glass of water next to me. But if we slow down and we really let ourselves steep in that, let that in a much more visceral way, it actually does start to shift the state. Because I can do it in a contracted way, right? A glass of water. I should be grateful that I have water. There's electricity. I know, first world problems. But if I really slow down and have that deep appreciation for the amount of support that's here, and that in this moment, and one of my favorite lines in Jeannie Zandi's Benevolent Thief meditations is like, notice that there is no harm happening here. Like notice. And then beyond that, notice there's a lot of support happening here right now. And this isn't a turn that frown upside down, fake it till you make it. It's like, no, really, go contact it. Really let it in. And something, I've probably said this on the show before, and any of my clients who are listening, I apologize. They've heard it a million times, but I love the analogy of a drizzle cake. You know what a drizzle cake is? It's like a British, I'm a baker and a sugar person. You're not so much. It's a British cake. It's just a sponge cake. But what you do is you poke a ton of holes in the sponge cake, and then you make these special syrups that you drizzle over the sponge cake that you've extra perforated so that it really seeps in and flavors the cake with like whatever, lavender, rose, honey, whatever. I love imagining that I'm a drizzle cake. If I contact something, really contact it. Everything we're talking about is not an idea here. It is a feeling. It's a felt experience. If I can really go, oh my gosh, the air is so clean right now. I am talking to Vanessa through this weird miracle technology that somebody, I don't know, I didn't have anything to do with figuring out Skype. But here it is, and we get to zoom into each other's rooms. And this glass of water is so refreshing that I can take a moment, and it almost feels like I'm letting or the way I picture it, because I'm me, is like I'm letting my cells relax. And the goodness, the nourishment of the environment, whatever it is I've drawn my attention towards, actually seeps in. It steeps in and gets in all of the little nooks and crannies of my being until it's like, there's this resonance. That's a state change. You don't have to do 45 minutes of meditation to get to that state change. And, I'm not trying to make this into like bullet points of what to do, but it is helpful sometimes so that hopefully for people who are listening, it's like, oh, okay, that's what we're going for, not following the rule of how many minutes a day you should meditate or whatever, but what's evocative of nervous system state change for you, for any individual? What gets us into a different place where we know that we're experiencing reality from a different perspective, dimension, part of the brain, however you want to describe it, because we're not contracted in the problem.
If you think about our psychological wounding especially, most of it is interpersonal. Obviously not all of it, but most of what we'll confront on a daily basis, especially that involves belief about ourselves, and whether we're safe with people or not, it's an interpersonal wound, right? So it involves more like this limbic system. And when I think about that, and I think about the nervous system at large, and I think about the way Stephen Porges teaches polyvagal theory, it's like for the nervous system to get back into its state of restoration, it needs to see cues of safety, right? Because it's the social engagement system that makes us feel, parasympathetic in the way we all think about it, that rest and relaxation nervous system. So the social engagement system will look for cues of safety. Now, the funny thing is, the most common way to think of cues of safety, which is relevant and sometimes extremely beneficial, is we look for it in others, right? So we look at people's eyes, we look at people's mouths, and we listen to people's voices. We listen to their intonation. It's interesting that you can almost always tell when someone's in a dysregulated state by their voice. Are they talking too high and too fast? Or are they yelling? Are they you can hear when people are dysregulated, right? I mean, It's actually not very hard to do, especially for hypervigilant ladies like ourselves, but I'm sure lots of you the same.
I prefer the term sensey.
So us senses we're looking at the eyes. Are they soft? Are they open? Are they receiving me? We're looking at the mouth. Is it smiling or is there tension? And these are cues of safety. Sometimes we've been so traumatized or we've been so unmet with love in our life that we can't begin this exercise with ourselves. And we first need a role model who can meet us with love. And we'll find a practitioner of some sort, a therapist, a coach, a craniosacral therapist, a massage therapist, whatever it is. We'll find some therapist of some sort, and they will meet us with cues of safety, and our body will learn how to relax into cues of safety, and we will internalize what it looks like to give love and support because we may not have had it. But once that's the case, what's interesting about the cues of safety is we never think that we could provide cues of safety to ourselves. Because, of course, in this version, when we think about it, it's external. I'm literally looking at a person and I'm looking at their eyes, and that's all important. That's all important. But oftentimes we're alone and our conditioning is running for no good reason, right? There's not actually a problem with any person. There's not a problem in reality. But what's happening is the mechanism's running, it got triggered, it's built an association, and I'm in a state of dysregulation over it. So when we think about that, we're in a state of dysregulation, we're having scary thoughts or thoughts about our worthlessness or something along those lines, and then how we often meet ourselves. And we often meet ourselves like you were describing before, Brooke, like, oh, come on, get over it. Oh, come on, what's your problem? Or like, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Just don't worry about it.
Or like, oh, you're great. You're great. You're doing great. Like, is it sort of the nicest option?
It's no big deal. It's no big deal, you know.
I love you.
And there's all sorts of ways that really aren't cueing safety. They may be fine. They're neutral to horribly self-critical and unkind, right? But oftentimes they're not actually cueing safety. So we think, okay, well, if I'm in pain, if I am reliving some kind of a past trauma, if I'm like living something out in my conditioning and I'm in pain and I'm suffering, I clearly have a dysregulated nervous system at that moment. I clearly need to return my body to a sense of safety. That's what it means to meet yourself with love. When you meet yourself with love, you let the energy move its way through your nervous system. Whatever was the repressed, trapped emotion or pain can move through without the narrative. It doesn't need the narrative. It can move through, and it can be met in the consciousness of compassion and love, and it can soften. And we can have a whole new experience of ourselves and a whole new release. So we need safety. We have to we're reestablishing safety and we're releasing these emotions. So if we instead could meet ourselves, even in some of what you're describing, Brooke, like the breath is a somatic way of cueing safety. Because if I'm breathing and I'm attuning to the breath and my breath starts to slow down as it naturally does, as I attune to it, and I might start to, let's say, bring my attention into my belly, or I don't know, like, am I engaging my whole body in this breath, right? As that attention shift happens, I think we start to downregulate a little bit, and it sends a feedback loop to the brain that says there's no crisis here because I'm breathing nice and slow. And that's a cue of safety. Mm-hmm. And if we look at our environment, like one step before what you said about the delicious ooey gooey honey flavor seeping in, is just what Neelam said. Like, is there any threat here? Or what Jeannie said, like, we look around our environment. We let our eyes take it in and feed our nervous system the information, no threat. Go one step farther, what you described, amazing, yum, support. There's actually support in my environment. These are all ways of cueing safety. And then another way is how we talk to ourselves. So now, probably both of us are visual, so I wonder if you do the same thing. Sometimes I'll put my hands on my heart, right? Because that actually secretes oxytocin, and it's such a lovely, literal and metaphorical way to meet yourself. But more, I usually see myself. I see the one that's wounded. I see it like a symbol in my mind. Maybe it's myself as a child at a certain period of time. Maybe it's myself today, a version of myself. And I literally speak to it. Mm-hmm. And I speak just like I'm speaking now. I love you. Everything's okay. You're okay, right? And you use your intonation, and you use your soft eyes, and you use your smile, and you open your heart, and you receive the pain of the one. And here's an important download that came to me this morning when I was working with a client session. To meet yourself with love is to meet yourself in this state of consciousness where warmth and care and compassion are pouring through you. But it's also not to necessarily believe the story of suffering. Mm-hmm. You know, one beautiful thing about love is you see someone in their wholeness, right? not just the part that was fragmented and hurt, but all of it. And you see that, let's say, for example, last week or so, I had a interpersonal situation where I got really triggered by this feeling that I don't belong. Like that was the real core wound. Like I don't belong. And I was so scared that something was proving that I was right. I didn't even know that this one was still like so activated under the surface until some friends lovingly triggered me and up it came, right? So as I met myself with love, it wasn't like, I know you don't belong. That's terrible.
It does hurt.
Like that's an example of how the limbic brain could be like, yeah, meeting myself with love. It sucks when you don't belong, right? Like, no. It's not
it's exactly
shift.
What happens. It's a very helpful illustration, right?
Yeah. It's like, oh, honey, you are an integral part of this universe. You are no mistake. You are created just to be you as you, and you are a part of the whole web of life. You are so precious. You are so sacred. I love you. I honor you. That's what it's like when I turn to meet myself with love with that. And even as I'm saying it out loud, just for example, I'm like, my whole body is just beginning to soften, feeling my own intonation, like feeling the way my face is moving and hearing the sound of my own voice. It all starts to soften.
This morning, of all mornings, right before we recorded this episode, I got to have one of these experiences too. I haven't, since I started DNRS 3 times in the last, 3 months, 4 months, only 3 times have I woken up with anxiety. Now I did.
But who's counting?
Right. But who's counting? But I did DNRS because I typically, historically wake up with anxiety. So it's like my marker, right? Vigilance likes to go, how's it going? So I woke up with the anxiety this morning. I noticed the anxiety. Immediately I went, like there was that kind of, and all the thoughts that come with it. I can't believe this is happening again. When will this be over? Am I so fucked up that this keeps happening? So it's so cartoonish, the thoughts that come, that I catch it, right? That I'm doing the whole like, come on. It's ridiculous. And similar to you, picturing this, and I think it's a very helpful context to have that when we're meeting these parts of ourselves, it is a reparenting movement. Like if you could have been parented perfectly, or let's say very well, because perfectly we're immediately like, that's dumb. That doesn't really happen. Let's say just very lovingly parented, enough love, enough attention, enough care. So it's imagining that that I can see the anxious one, right? And something else, some higher self, I picture it as an actual higher self, approaches her in this loving way that you would approach a hurting child. And it's just like, honey, hi, like what's going on? That's very different than being in the trenches, right? And going like, it does hurt, over empathizing. It's what's going on and what, first of all, she, the anxious one, really saw, it's like, oh God, oh my God, someone's turning towards me. Someone's paying attention with care. And I'm not just a burden because I feel this way, which is what the initial like, oh, come on, feeling this again. No, it's supposed to be fixed by now. And, what she delivered to me in that moment was this, doesn't anybody see how much I'm suffering kind of sense. And so I hear that kind of language and it's like, oh, that's not because of anything going on in my environment right now. That must really hurt to have carried that. That's from an old experience. Isn't there anybody around here that sees that I'm suffering? And then it's this very tender parenting of that self. Just very simple, kissing the boo-boo, right? Like, that must really hurt. But I see you. I'm here with you. And, in my case this morning, because this was happening when I was still in bed, and doesn't the comforter feel so nice? on top of us. And the sheets feel so crisp and the air is starting to smell like spring, and not in a like, hey, honey, cheer up. It's more like, I'm right here with you, and there's bonus goodness here that we can together just touch a little bit. And it's been actually an interesting day, because that beginning a day like that, usually that's when we're really pulling a thread of some of these deeper conditioned parts of ourself. And so the thread keeps unraveling in this very, very loving, very beautiful way, where it just keeps delivering me more viewpoints from that aspect of self, but it doesn't have any of the feelings of believing that. Mm-hmm. Or like there's nothing scary or upsetting, or it's just like, oh, and I see this, like watching a movie. Oh, and I see that, and I see that, and I see that way that behaved or appeared in life as that belief system. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to bring to the forefront. Yeah. It's a loving, tender, parental kind of care. And that already implies that there's a separation, right? That it's not you, the doomed one who hasn't gotten it over yet.
Mm-hmm. No, you are the angel. I mean, it's so good to remember that it's become crystal clear to us that our body is a part of awakening, but also we are not our body. And so we talk about the brain and we talk about the nervous system, and that's all real. Like that's a part of it. I think it's what creates a limitation from us always being in contact, like direct, raw experience with the truth of who we are and our reality. But we're also not our body, and we are the consciousness that's overseeing this, that's, oh, honey. And just like our idealized version of a parent, we can have deep understanding and empathy for struggle without believing it. Like the example I used with my client this morning was like, let's say your kid is scared to go to school, right? Oh, I get it. It's so hard to go somewhere new for the first time. And, we can have all these like, oh, are they going to like me feelings, like totally understandable, right? But there's no danger here. Mm. So we can see both levels. Sometimes I think, depending on how we were taught in our upbringing, we could imagine that we have to like either full sail agree, or we have to debate it, or we have to, but that kind of idealized parent, it finds empathy and understanding, so much understanding. Like anything that we have that arises in us that hurts was innocent, was created in innocence and error and misunderstanding. And it is always there for a good reason. Always. Like it came because it was the best we could come up with when we were meeting something and we didn't know how to make sense of it, and we couldn't hold it and we couldn't process it, right? So I think it's really nice that we can just, okay, right, I love you. And it's really just this, it is a state shift. It's a consciousness shift. We can meditate to get there. We can go out into nature to get there. That's for so many people, the access point. For others, it will be art. But anything that starts to calm down the nervous system so it can regulate will make it sometimes a little easier to turn and meet ourselves with love. And if we can't quite get there, well, then that's what other people are around for, right? That's when we turn for support. And I think as I was thinking about this conversation and the brain and the nervous system, it made me reflect on our talk with Lynn, where you and I were both saying, oh, I'm sorry, it's Lynn Marie. I keep getting that wrong. It's such an Italian habit to shorten people's names, with Lynn Marie, where we were saying, like, I couldn't have done it without support. And I understand now, if I look through this lens, why it was so hard to transform and release conditioning and pain without support. It's because we needed those cues of safety. Because if your nervous system is that dysregulated, like forget about it. If you're completely dissociated, right? If you are in freeze mode and you're like floating like a balloon above your head, you are not going to be able to meet yourself with love. And if you are triggered where your body wants to be like crumpled into a little ball in the corner with your hands over your face to protect yourself, you're not going to be able to turn and meet yourself with love. Like that just happens sometimes. Sometimes our trauma is big enough or our pain is great enough and the nervous system kicks in to protect us and it puts us into those positions. And we're not going to get that spaciousness where we can step out and kind of turn back towards and say all of the things we always needed to hear. It's not going to be available. And that's okay. You know, there were times when that was not available to me. There's probably times when that's still not available to me. It's just that, the more I've healed and evolved, the more, same with you, Brooke, I think, the more it's like our basic resting state. Like that you can just, oh yeah, it's right there. There's the love. There's the support. There's that access to this higher state of consciousness. So then that's fine. We find the practitioner of the kind that we like, that we feel safe around, that helps us learn what it's like to be met with love and compassion and kindness until we can internalize that enough that that can become a bit of a resting place for us. And then it still may be like a muscle or a skill, you know, that we're learning to bring into our lives. It didn't come overnight for me. I know it didn't come overnight for you. But all of a sudden we have some capacity. Whereas in the beginning, we may need support because we have no capacity for this. Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't have capacity for this much younger in my life.
No.
The dysregulation was way too big, and I believed my conditioning too much.
It absolutely was me, as far as I was concerned back then. There was just no inquiry about anything. It was me. All of the conditioning was me.
See my thoughts, and I could even get some space from them, but I couldn't like them. Like, I can see you, but like, ew, I hate these thoughts. Like, no, thank you. Like, so then I wasn't going to turn to them with love. And then I could see them and I could be like neutral about them. Like, okay, you know, we're human. You're here. I'm not going to have any beef with you, but like, I'm not into you. I'm not going to swaddle you, you know, and like, so it kind of like grew incrementally. So if you're at the stage where you can't seem to get that spaciousness and that shift to meet yourself with love, like no big deal. That happens to all of us sometimes. It's just, then that might be a sign that you need to learn to receive support from a very specifically safe other first.
Yeah.
And eventually.
I was going to say, this show was completely born out of you and I needing that and going and getting it, you know. It was this adventure of state change. We would not have called it that back then. We didn't know what we were doing, but it was like we were finding people and places that we could be that would signal to us this signature of safety. I mean, people talk in spiritual circles all the time about transmission. Do you know they transmit? They transmit enlightenment. If you go, you'll get a transmission. What is it that these people, let's say embodied awake people who are also highly sane, because you could be awake and not highly sane, and we've heard enough gurus behaving badly stories to know that that's true. But let's say we have a highly sane, high functioning, very mature embodied awake teacher, like the kinds of people that we've spoken to here on the show. What is it they're transmitting? They're transmitting, this is what it feels like to be in a balanced, harmonious nervous system. They're transmitting safety and they're transmitting tenderness. And I would just say, be suspicious of any teacher that's, you know, beating you over the head with what you're doing wrong, right? Because the transmission is tenderness, permission to exist, permission to be a human being who's got like foibles. And then seeing that this other human being who hasn't left their humanness because they're in a body can transmit this state that just feels like a relief, feels like safety. It feels like you want to take a warm bath in it and be like, ugh. So that's what transmission is just people who can really hold this balanced state and exist from a perspective of tenderness.
I like that a lot. And in the most rarefied state, it's unconditional love or unconditional tenderness. And I think that's what I was gathering when I was learning about this prefrontal cortex, is that it's like when you can be connected to the whole, when you really feel a fabric of the entire cosmos, you're in the aspect of your being that has no conditions. Well, in the aspect of your being that's not conditioned, you can have this unconditional positive regard for another. And that's so different than the love that most of us experienced, because we're all conditional beings banging around doing the best we can. But conditional beings, kind of implies we have conditioning, right? Mm-hmm. So conditional love is often on the menu. So that beautiful sense of you're just good. Mm-hmm. It's just okay. You're okay. That happens when someone's in that really highest part of themselves, really in that angel of your being part, can be so beautiful to bask in. Thank you so much for being a part of our community and for listening to today's show. The show notes, including all the resources we mentioned, live on our website at blissandgrit.com. Our member platform is at patreon.com/blissandgrit. This is where you can go donate to the show and also get rewards for your support. If you're wanting to engage with these topics with us in a deeper way, it's a great place to go for a more immersive experience. We'd also love it if you'd come play with us on Instagram and Facebook. Or subscribe on the website, which again is blissandgrit.com, if you want to get our weekly digest of what resources we are currently loving. We are so grateful for all of the reviews you've already written, for the notes that you send, and most especially for the membership support you've provided on Patreon. We are grateful, we feel blessed, and we're happy to be with you. Thank you all so much. Till next week.